Thanks for being here. Very briefly said, TiiQu Talks is all about enhancing skills that matter. TiiQu launched this initiative back in beginning of this year, and as a consequence of another series of events called the Trusted Ecosystems, which were more focused on the blockchain technology. Today, we move the conversation to, we spread the conversation across all technologies and sustainability topics, because that's what will change the world in the future. So I'm now giving the stage to Alex for introducing the topic and our distinguished guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. Thank you for participating for today's fantastic talk event. And we are going to have a fascinating topic to discuss with three distinguished speakers, and then they're also going to join as a panel. And then today's topic is very, very important for the sustainability measurement for the in respect to the SEG or the ESG. And then so we found that because we counted about 500 expressed their interest for this topic. So I think that there is a hot topic in sustainability related issues. Okay, so we are going to have three speakers, and they are going to join as a panel. And then we are going to, I'm going to briefly talk about what the topics looks like of today's talk, and then set the stage. And then after my introduction, that actually we have three distinct speakers, and Joe, McDonald, and Juliana Hess, and Mazi Zarrehparvar. And then they were going to present or talk about their views individually in order. Okay, so I'm going to start my introduction to set the stage. Okay, so I will share my screen. Okay, so can you see my screen well?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm Alex Lee. I'm a principal consultant in Tech IPM. Also, I work with Laura as a US ambassador for the TiiQu Talks. And then I organized and then collaborate with Aurora for a long time. So this is several times we work together. And then today's topic is about how you can measure the sustainability, and is there any better way to measure the sustainability? Okay, so I'm going to talk about why we are here. Yeah, we are all interested in sustainability or the ESG in the modern terms. And then I'm going to talk about why it is imperative. And then it's well known in the global level. We have in the United Nations level that we have sustainable development goal in the 17 topics actually that they're going to develop in the collaboration in the worldwide in the 17 topics. And mostly the topic cover economic development, and then for the planet environment, and then social and the human issues, and then other topics that are relevant for the global economic development. Okay, so at the global level, we well on the last year in the UK, we have a COP26, and then recently there was an IPCC report about the climate change risk. And then in the COP26, we have a discussion about that we need to reduce our carbon emission by year 2030 is about 40% less compared to the year 2010 carbon emission is a huge amount we should effort to reduce unless we have irreversible impact. We have some disastrous effect from these global warming things. And then also in the global level, we are in a circular economy, and then we want with less waste and less use of the water and valuable resources. And then even in the global level, in the economic level, we in the Davos Forum, we talk about like how we respond to this climate change in the worldwide. And then also like a European Commission in a like a corporate ways to actually the due diligence as for the in a corporate level that every company should do diligence about how to manage their sustainability. And then also we can think about how actually they relate to human right and environment is a global value chain, is a global effect. And then also in the locally, for example, I'm in the United States, and the United States have like a regulation body like SEC, like they are going to including climate related risk disclosure strictly before reporting mandate in a soon. And then also, for example, in the United States, we have like a huge bill, 1.2 trillion bill to make infrastructure sustainable. So this sustainable infrastructure is another topic we are going to have another talk. And then also we have like ESG asset management is under $53 trillion by 2025, is 1/3 of the global asset under management. So it's a huge amount of investment fund will be allocated to these ESG sustainability issues. And then also we have, for example, ESG investing is mainstream among the investing community. And also we have require some sustainability accounting. And then we currently have several type of standard way to do accounting this sustainability measurement. But we are now on the stage of the unified way to reporting and the measure the sustainability through some standard like a community in the worldwide. And then also recently they talk about in Harvard Business Review that we have a sustainable businesses went mainstream. So sustainability management is like a main topic, is everyday practice of every company and institutions. And then also that we hear about like a New York Times talk about already think of the like a CEO of the BlackRock talk about the depending stakeholder capitalism. So we, for example, here, this is Apple Computer's website that they express that they are no longer served for the shareholder in the traditional capitalism, but they are served for the people, stakeholders like a people, society, and planet. So it's a trend that why we are here why we are interested in the SDGs and the ESG and the measurement. Okay, so why we measure? Because we want to have a effect. So for example, that why you do some like sustainability measurement? Because we want to do good things for the planet, people, and society. And then so we want to see how we well perform for our effort in the measurement. So that's related to for example ratings. So you know well that there are many rating companies to measure whether they invested companies that are doing well in the sustainability measurement. And then also, for example, that in-house that the company also that they want to measure how they well manage their sustainability issues. So measurement is at the center of this all of the sustainability measurement and the sustainability management and the investment. So that's why that we are focused on today about the how to measure this sustainability. Okay, so finally, this is the one we need to think about that. So we talk about sustainability measurement, and then we need to think about that why we measure, right? Because we want to whether measure that we want whether we are doing well in our performance, we are doing well in the management of sustainability. But actually, in reality, that we need to be thinking about measure what. So for example, they measure the input or output impact. What this means is that, for example, here is one example that for if you want to be measure your diversity And then simply you measure the number of the women participating in your organization, or the participant in your board member is the currently we measure, and then we measure that the count, and then we evaluated whether they are well performed, they're like a diversity effort. But actually what we want is actually how actually the women actually can participate in the decision making to reflect their diverse perspective. And then also impact actually why we doing this activity, because we want to be like a social value created by such decisions. So we should have in mind that what we measure and how we measure, and then whether we are well measured. So, okay, so I already set the stage, and then I'm going to start my sharing. And then I'm going to over to our distinguished speakers, and then Joe will be the first, and Julia and Mazi will talk about their individual view. Joseph, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you. And hello, everybody. So I'm Joe McDonald, and I'm the principal at architecture firm called Urban A&O. We are a global firm, although we're a boutique firm, a small firm, but we do operate worldwide. Now, in 2017, our firm went completely carbon neutral, net zero. And by that, what I mean is we made a commitment to our clients that we would achieve carbon neutrality with all of our work, new work. We also do in the EU and in the UK, we also do building retrofits. And we offer a full suite of services to support that, including ESG advising. So I want to focus very briefly and very specifically on the topic, because both ESG and the SDGs, they really came out of very kind of noble pursuits. And surprisingly, ESG has been, first of all, the idea has been around since the 1960s. It was formalized in 2005 by Kofi Annan at the UN when he invited many people together, investment people, financial institutions, CEOs, and it was a study called "Who Cares Wins," and so that was kind of the beginning of ESG. Then in 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals were also developed by the United Nations. But in 2015, that was 193 countries that made that commitment. And there are, as we know, there are 17 SDGs. And the first one, the most important one, is to end world poverty. Now, the deadline for SDGs is clear. It's 2030. So that is 8 years from now. And if we look at the list of 149 countries, we find that, of course, it is Scandinavia that is at the top of the list. But then one way to transition from the clarity of the SDGs to the kind of murkiness of ESG is, Alex, I noted on one of your slides that you did address Larry Fink's, much anticipated CEO letter, which comes out every year. So this year, the title of his CEO letter is "The Power of Capitalism." But if we read through that letter, we find conflicting comments, and we find conflicting agendas by Larry Fink. So for example, he states that stakeholder capitalism is not about politics. It is not social or ideological, and it is not woke. So he's using a colloquial term, woke. Now, we all know what woke means. It means to be alert to injustice in society, especially racism. So if that is his position in defense of capitalism, he then goes on to lightly address ESG. So he talks about the next 1,000 unicorns, and he says that they will not be social media platforms, but they will be sustainable, scalable innovators. So, you know, which is it? Is he endorsing sustainability, or is he not? So I find that confusing. Now, if we were to focus on ESG, we have to talk about where ESG is being evaluated. Is it in the UK? Is it in the EU? Or is it in the US? So corporate social responsibility, CSR reporting, it's a model used by individual companies, but ESG is used by investors. And what we all know is it's called impact investing. But in the United States, you know, we have a tendency, first of all, Biden was elected January of 2021. So really, ESG is at its very infancy in the US. And already there are rumblings about litigation with these kind of investments. And so the term soft law is being tossed around here. Soft law means that there is no law regarding ESG. So it's I find that in the US, compared to the EU or the UK, it is very difficult to advise or to understand ESG. Now, I want to share my screen for a moment because in the built environment, in the architecture world, first of all, you know, as shapers of cities, we have a real responsibility to understand, to research, and to kind of control CO2 emissions. So I have one foot in practice and one foot in academia. And so I teach at University of Pennsylvania. And what is helpful about that is that we're able to conduct research into emerging materials. So that would include low carbon concrete, aerated concrete, and bringing these research ideas to fruition in the built environment is really what we can do, all designers, as we contribute to society. So I will share my screen, and I'm going to show you just briefly a little bit about what that looks like. So we have a series of core competencies in our firm. The first one is indigenous landscapes. The second is data centers. So here's an example of a data center in Nevada. We can't get data centers to net zero because they're so hot inside. But as facade engineers, we can get the facades to net zero, and we can get the data center to carbon neutral by having wastewater treatment plants on site, for example. And then this just continues. This is a campus in Nevada. We're using upcycled polymer. We're using recycled steel. And this is what today's architecture looks like. That is carbon neutral or net zero. CLT, cross-laminated timber. And then it just goes on and on and on this deck. I will stop sharing because this is a very deep dive into the research that we do at my firm. So I guess, you know, if I were to conclude on an up note, especially in the US, related to ESG, the fact is, although, you know, big oil is a problem and has always been a problem, I think that the promise in the US is the uptick. So, for example, the S&P 500 indexed published that 85% of companies that are in that index are publishing sustainability or corporate responsibility reports. And that is up, so that was 2017, and that was up from 2011, when just under 20% of S&P. So in general, to close, I think that we are on the right direction, but in the US, I think that we do struggle with definitions, and I know that we do struggle with federal policy. So for example, Biden could not get a climate agenda passed in the US, and that is because of a Democrat, Manchin. So it is, this is going to be, continue to be a challenge in the United States, where it is not a challenge in the EU, and it is not a challenge in the UK. So it's a uniquely American phenomena. But you know, I hope for the best, and I think that we're on the right path. Thanks so much, Alex.
You want me to go ahead and start with mine, Laura?
Yes, please, Juliana.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Juliana Hess. I am based in the outskirts of Washington, D.C., but I'm only a recent transplant here. I've lived, I grew up in Virginia. I've lived in the Northeast. I've lived in Europe and Latin America. So I come to you as a citizen of the world, as cliche as that might sound, but it's true, as it has informed the way I think and the way I feel about the topic that we're discussing today. I am the Chief Impact Officer at InsureTek. InsureTek is an AI-powered IoT platform that connects the latest technology to the built environment. So Joe and I share a love for the built environment, which is good to know. I joined the company with the mandate of embedding sustainability and ESG and the principles of impact making into our company. It's a very early stage company, and it is an exciting role for me. So I come to you. Sorry, somebody say something. I come to you to share my journey, and I hope that my journey will help inform your journey. I'm going to be less academic. I feel that from my own experience, Joe referred to this, there's so many frameworks and so many definitions and so much talk about regulation and about different organizations. It just makes it a little bit too daunting. I've been studying ESG and impact and sustainability for several years now. And I feel that the more I know, the more I don't know. So we're all here to learn. When it comes to ESG and the SDGs, the way I see them, I see the SDGs as my North Star. SDGs are allowing me and the different organizations that I serve to point to a purpose. It has helped us inform what our purpose is. And based on those SDGs, I've used ESG as the rail tracks, if you will, that are going to keep me on track to achieve that purpose. They're very different animals in my perspective. The SDGs, they are concrete. They have set standards. They're globally recognized. Many corporations have started to adapt them and incorporate them into their own strategy. The trouble with ESG is that, well, for one, I seem to encounter that a lot of people do not understand how they work in unison. But the truth is, from my perspective, if they're not working in unison, they're not really working at all. I also believe that governance is the first amongst those equals. If there isn't a strong governance, then whatever initiatives you might have under S or under G are not really going to be strong enough to show impact, and you could possibly fall into the traps of greenwashing. And then there's the issue of impact. Impact is the hardest to explain in the sense that I don't think as a society we truly understand the meaning of impact when it comes to solving the world's wicked problems. We're not talking about investing $5 and getting 25. The idea of impact to me is more a long-term proposition. It goes beyond outputs and is about outcomes. And why do we measure? Well, as a capitalist, I would say that we measure because we need to understand where our investment dollars go. But in a world full of wicked problems, we also need to understand where the dollars that we spend, how they're affecting people and planet. So I know this is a very, so with that in mind, with those definitions in mind, my experience has been that when we first turn to incorporating SDGs or ESG or impact into our organizations, it seems like we're trying to do it all. And I come here to tell you that we don't. I come here to tell you that in my experience, we need to pick a lane. In my experience, most companies and most organizations are already doing a lot of good work. It's just a matter of identifying what that work is. So I'll give you an example. I don't think I have to believe and remain positive that most businesses go into business with the idea of delivering something positive. And then they kind of lose their way at times, and we end up with situations like Enron. But for the most part, businesses are out there to serve their community, to serve their employees, to serve their stakeholders. The idea that you got to remember that the majority of the world is not Fortune 100 companies. What we hear in the news is the Fortune 100 companies, but the majority of companies out there are really small businesses trying to make an impact in their communities. So my experience has been, one, make sure that the fear of what ESG is, the fear of what SDGs are, the fear of what impact is needs to be taken away. In my case, in the startups that I've worked with and the ones that I'm working on, there's a lot of good already in these organizations. is about matching what ESG is and figuring out what their impact is without the fear of being found out. I think if we can take away that fear, that will be positive. It shouldn't just be driven by compliance. A lot of companies are turning to the ESGs or to the SDGs or to whatever frameworks out of a fear because they have to comply. I think if we start the exercise early on and we realize that we're already doing a lot of the right things, we can move beyond compliance and we can look at efficiencies, at creating efficiency into our business, at building more resilient businesses. We can even move beyond that and engage in innovation. So this is a very convoluted way of saying, I don't think that, to me, the SDGs and the ESGs are one or the other. I feel that you first have to figure out your purpose. And I feel that SDGs are more in line to help you figure out what that purpose is. And if you look, then the next step is laying out the groundwork for how you're going to achieve that purpose. And that's what ESG comes in. And once you have ESG governance and policies and processing in place, then you can then move on to figuring out what the KPIs, what the metrics are going to be that make sense to your organization. Beyond that, then there's room for measuring the impact, is assessing, like in any business, I assume every year, every 6 months, you look back and you say, okay, what have we done right? What have we done that isn't necessarily optimal, and how can we change that to improve? What I'm trying to get to is the media and this, there's a lot of noise around what these letters mean, but the reality is a lot of us are already doing this. We just have to take a step back and try to match what our organizations are doing to that purpose, to those guardrails, and figure out how to measure them. I don't know if, I don't want to go beyond explaining and getting too academic. The challenges that I've encountered are primarily based on fear and on the idea that we have to do it all, and the idea that we have to make an impact tomorrow, the idea that we have to solve all the problems right away. I'm come here to invite you to take it one day at a time and to collaborate. One of the beautiful things about SDGs and ESG and impact is that is allowing us, it's opening the door for collaboration. And instead of looking at other companies as our competitors, is allowing us to look at other companies as our collaborators. We're going to solve the wicked problems of the world. We're not in competition. We have to collaborate. So it's changing the mindset of how we do business. And I will leave you with the thought, first identify your purpose. Second, lay out the groundwork for how you're going to achieve that purpose. Third, try to figure out the best KPIs that make sense for your organization. And fourth, try to dig the fear out of what you're doing. Fifth, recognize that society is the new stakeholder. Listen to society, listen to the voice of the customer, listen to the voice of the employee, listen to the voice of the shareholder. And you don't need to look too far beyond what's happening right now globally. All these companies pulling out of Russia. The truth is, companies could have been behaving in the way they're behaving right now years ago, but it's a reaction of that voice of society that is driving that reaction, that is driving then political place. So we're in an exciting time. It's an exciting moment. I don't think that there's a choice between SDGs and ESGs. I think it's just a matter of looking at it as building blocks to a greater purpose. That's my 2 cents based on my experience.
Thank you, Juliana.
Thanks, Juliana. Mehdi, your turn.
Okay, well, hello, everybody. Alex and Laura, thank you very much for this opportunity to present, and welcome everybody to this event. So I'm going to start with sort of more basic ground up, what are SDGs, what is ESG, and then take it from there. What might be an alternative? So as I think most of the audience probably knows, SDGs are driven by governments. And these are goals that governments have put together to achieve by 2030. And they're things that have already been described, like reducing poverty, having less hunger in the world, et cetera. And they're not really specifically targeted at companies. They're targeted at everybody and governments' goals to achieve these things for the people of the world. ESGs, on the other hand, are very much company driven. So, companies are being asked to consider their environmental, social, and governance attributes for one primary reason, which is how it might affect their financial returns. So the goal of ESGs is actually what is the material impact, the financial impact, as SASB put it. SASB is one of the framework developers for ESG. What is going to be the financial impact or risk effect of how you manage your environmental considerations, your social considerations, and your governance considerations? And the way SASB describes it, which is the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, is that every industry faces different risk impacts depending on what drives profitability in the short run, medium term, and long term. So really, I would think of ESG as what do companies need to worry about to make more money and create value. And just because it has a nice ring to it, like it's social responsibility or environmental responsibility, the main metrics that are out there for ESG are not about being a good company and good-hearted company. They're about how do you make sure you can keep creating value and making money? Whereas SDGs are more about, geez, wouldn't it be great if we eliminated poverty and didn't have hunger in the world and so on. So they're really quite different and distinct underlying philosophies for each. So what's really the puppet master that's driving sustainability initiatives around the world? So I've done a couple of annual conferences at Oxford. I organized the annual Sustainable Finance Conference there. And the idea is that there are multiple stakeholders that might care about sustainability issues. So governments is one stakeholder group. They're the ones that have primarily driven SDGs. And then companies need to worry about what governments are thinking, because as companies engage in UN efforts to improve and enhance the lives of people around the world, it trickles into the general mindset that ends up in regulations. As has already been alluded to, for example, we had the privilege of having the Undersecretary of Labor at our last Oxford conference, and he talked about the fact that now for ERISA programs, which are retirement programs in the US, anybody who's in the US and has a 401k, their 401k program is regulated by the Department of Labor. And the definition of materiality now is such that you can include ESG funds into retirement programs like 401ks. You could not do that in the previous administration to the same degree because the definition of materiality was different. So eventually governments can have an impact on what's expected of companies and how they behave. But of course, there are other stakeholders that a company has to pay attention to, such as its owners, its board of directors, its employees, suppliers, et cetera, if it really wants to shine along ESG metrics. And so the idea that you hear bandied about is that stakeholders drive long-term business success, and that companies that focus just on financial returns will not achieve the kinds of success that companies that also focus on social impact might. And the idea that's out there these days is that companies have to be mindful about how they impact everything. But again, I want to emphasize that it's being mindful so as to become a more valuable company, and not because you really care necessarily about the SDG goals. I'm being a bit cynical, but that what's really driving ESG at most companies when you get to the board level and the executive level is, what's it going to do for my company value? And so why do companies that care about company value have to think about stakeholders' perceptions of their ESG performance? Customers are becoming increasingly concerned about ethics. So one of your primary constituents or stakeholders as a company is, of course, your customers. And McKinsey did a survey recently that showed that depending on what generation that you were in, you care more about ethics. And so if you're the closer you come in time in terms of generations, like Gen Z, one of the main drivers for them around consumption is their understanding or belief in how ethical the product, the company producing the product is. And so you have ideas like fair trade, organic, and consumers want to know what they're buying and what went into making the things that they're buying. And so that's one reason customers, for practical purposes, for making money, have to try to differentiate themselves along lines of things like, we didn't use GMOs, we're cruelty-free, we have organic, we're sustainable. And of course, this was a contract I had with SK Telecom. We did a project for Oxford. Specifically here, we were looking at telecoms. How could SK Telecom differentiate itself from other companies? And the idea, that we presented to them was that ESG branded products create happy customers. The customers want to feel that, especially younger customers want to feel that they're buying things that are ethical, ethically developed. So every stakeholder has issues that can be addressed using the ESG framework, and that's what the framework providers like SASB help you do. So I'm going to move forward here in the interest of time to what I think the real issues are with both SDGs and the ESG framework. So SDGs are the government saying, wouldn't it be great if we achieved all these wonderful goals for humanity? ESG is companies saying, geez, if we don't pay attention to materiality issues that might affect our future value, that are material to a profitability, then it's just another risk metric, right? You have to watch out for all risks as a corporate executive. As we saw the statistics from McKinsey, consumers care more about ethics. So it just becomes a practical consideration for businesses to also care about ethics. But in reality, so there was that image I had of the puppet. Who's the puppet master? Is it the government? Is it businesses? Or is it consumers that drive sustainability? In reality, the world economy is primarily created through consumption. And that, I think all of us intuitively understand that. In the US, it's probably closer to 80%, but on a global basis, 60% of the global economy is driven by what people buy. So everybody remembers from the first macroeconomics class in college that GDP is comprised of consumption, government spending, investment, and net exports. So consumption makes up the majority of the global economy. And really, if you're going to impact whether we live in a more sustainable world or not, it's SDGs are nice to have, ESG is nice to have, but it comes down to our individual agency over our lives and the decisions that we choose to make about how we consume. So we did another report at Oxford for SK Telecom, which was about the fact that there are going to be 3 million more urban inhabitants with very intense consumption needs and desires over the next 20 years. And so if all of those individuals consume and live the way that the rest of us live, then obviously the planet is going to be in big trouble. And it doesn't really matter what ESG standards or SDG goals you have if you don't change the behaviors of individuals. And so, of course, individuals are motivated, you believe in Maslow's hierarchy, by things like eating and having a roof over your head, feeling safe, being loved, self-esteem, and self-actualization. And really, market economies are completely centered around how do you induce people to consume something. So really, the heart of market economics is I want, and I must have that. And you must have it for any one of those Maslow reasons, because you need to fill your tummy, or because you need to status signal, or because you feel that it somehow helps you actualize yourself. And so you have a certain amount of food need, but what you actually want is something much more luxurious. You have a certain amount of clothing need, but what you actually want is something much more luxurious. You have a certain amount of transportation need, but what you actually want is something more luxurious. You have a certain amount of housing need. Well, this is not probably a good example, but what we all want is much more than what is sustainable. And so, of course, that's going to lead to some issues. So what are we to do? The more informed we are, the more likely we are to make decisions that align with what our own perception of being good people. And so one way to improve our decision making and to get us to participate in this process of creating a more sustainable world, in addition to what governments are doing, in addition to what companies are doing, is of course for us to have access to information about things like what the supply chain of the products that we're consuming looks like. And why that's important is once that supply chain becomes transparent, which is probably only doable with blockchain, then everybody else will know what you're buying. And so all of a sudden your social need to signal that you're a good person will take over your need to have more status, because people will judge you for what you buy, because everybody knows, ooh, that guy's buying something that in the supply chain has a kid sitting and sewing, or that guy's buying something that in the supply chain is oil coming from a country that's actually blowing up other people. So one of the keys, I think, and this is very much why I was excited that Laura invited me to this presentation, is the way blockchains the whole distributed ledger can actually create transparency in the supply chain. So I'm just going to conclude with the SDG versus ESG. So SDG is about nature and suffering. It's about how do you reduce human and natural degradation? How do you feed people? How do you keep habitats healthy, driven by the government? ESG is about valuation and how to keep customers. It's about, it's just another product feature like calories or build quality or functionality. You look at the package, it says 53 calories, organic, you say, got it. So it's another feature in your consumption decision-making, and that companies care about that because they want you to buy. And of course, there's some overlaps. There are things that both governments want and that ESG accomplishes. But at the end of the day, it's about how will our ethics drive our consumption. And I'm not really sure that it's going to very much, because, for example, the UK just committed to stopping buying Russian oil by the end of the year, because God forbid that our oil prices go up. And of course, you know, most people care more about taking care of their families than about any third-party issues. So I think the missing piece here, and why SDGs and ESGs are not sufficient, is that we don't have the consumer side, which is the biggest part of the economy, figured out yet. And to do that, we probably need radical transparency, and that means blockchains. Thank you.
Thank you, Mazi. Okay, so we have a fantastic talk from 3 distinguished speakers. Okay, so we are now going to start our panel discussion. Okay, so in logistics, we are going to have several questions to discuss. Actually, these questions actually we obtained before for the event. And then also we have 2 questions that the audience raised today. So we are going to run the 7 questions to talk about. And then so anyone can have an answer, you can talk about it, your view. Okay, so first question that we want to discuss is, I think this is a hot maybe issue of today, because many people are asked several times about this because the terminology, they want the clarification that why we are talking about ESG, SDG, sustainability in a like interchangeably, right? So this was a question. So some may say that like ESG and sustainability are different metrics, or some say that like ESG and SDGs are completely different. For example, the audience talk about that. His view that SDG has a specific goals, where ESG is ill-defined without any goal. And the corporation have embraced ESG term because it is kind of vague and reportable metrics ranking. So I think that this is an interesting view, but anyway, because we all have a different aspect of this terminology. So we want to discuss about why we mix, or what are the difference, or what is your view about the ESG and SDG and sustainability in terminology. Is there anyone to talk about this?
I think we've all touched on it. Again, from my perspective, they're definitely not the same, and they serve different purposes. And I think Mazi touched on that, where the SDGs are a more global standard. They are standardized, they're driven by government organizations, where the ESG, there's nothing standard about them. Every person has a different interpretation. Every company has a different interpretation. Every continent has a different interpretation. Whereas in Europe, I can speak about being in the Netherlands, where ESG, pension funds adopted ESG principles very early on. It was a risk-driven exercise. Whereas here, when I talk to people here in the United States, the first thing that comes out of people's mouth, do I need to be hugging trees to implement my ESGs? So it really, culture also plays a big role in how ESGs are defined, corporate culture and geographic culture. That's, my perspective. I don't think they're the same, and I think they serve different purposes.
Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I'll repeat what I said. Hopefully I can add some other insights. SDGs are, yes, they occur at the governmental level, but they are so clearly defined. So again, to end hunger, there are statistics that over the last 15 years, they have made great strides internationally to reduce hunger. There are like firm numbers, whereas ESG, I think just as Juliana was saying, is, it depends, as I mentioned, where are you? Are you in the UK? Are you in Scandinavia? Are you in the EU? The definitions are vague. Unfortunately, if we are focused on being in the US, questions are arising now, very timely questions. So for example, S, I want to focus on S. And I tried to do that with Larry Fink's letter. Is supplying arms to the Ukraine, is that a social good? So these definitions are like, they change month to month. They change according to political landscape, and they change according to geography. So it's a very vague topic.
Thank you. Mazi, do you have any opinion about that?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other speakers put it really nicely. There's definitely vagaries in ESG, but there's a global movement toward more clarification around requirements from companies, driven by companies that set up the frameworks. And there's a whole, I call it the environmental reporting industrial complex and rating complex that's in place to support companies and in terms of what they should report and how they should report it. And if you study the annual reports of just about any Fortune 1000 company over the past 5 years, you'll see an increasing number of pages being taken by sustainability reporting and compliance. Not compliance is the wrong word, but an attempt to reflect company performance in terms of the frameworks, the leading frameworks that are out there. So I think it's becoming more clear within companies what they need to report and how they need to report it. Because of those frameworks, they're very helpful. They are showing up in annual reports and in increasing with increasing content. And of course, in Europe and in the US, more regulations are coming into place for specific types of disclosures. So I think overall companies are reporting more and they're reporting it with better quality. I think that the challenge still is how much can you rely on that information? There's still a sense of obfuscation. So I work with a lot of institutional investors who study annual reports and they feel like they're not getting a granular enough level of content from those reports. And so asset owners and asset managers end up spending a lot of time with management, digging down specifically into metrics. And so, of course, over time, more and more of those metrics that asset owners and asset managers care about will show up in annual reports and will be fully disclosed. But what is still going to be a challenge for companies is that they don't have visibility upstream into their supply chains. And somebody earlier in the chain asked about scope 2 and scope 3 emissions, for example. Scope 1 and scope 2 emissions are things that really the company can know about. It's emissions they control themselves, but upstream emissions from their supply chain, very hard for them to know. And again, it's another argument for linking up the supply chain through blockchain so that you do create that transparency upstream, whether it's how are your upstream vendors and suppliers managing their CO2 emissions or how are they managing their employees. Those are all factors that are really not going to be knowable from the annual report, or no matter how much the institutional investors ask the Fortune 1000 company, because the Fortune 1000 companies themselves don't have transparency upstream into their supply chains.
Yeah.
You know, just to shift the conversation a bit, if we just put the acronyms aside for a moment and talk about just sustainability as a mindset, I think that that what is hopeful is, and I think many of the speakers on the panel have alluded to this. You know, think about one's sphere of influence. So as an individual, you know, what contributions can you make within your sphere of influence? If you own a small business, if you're a sole proprietor, what contribution to sustainability can you make in your world? And if you're a publicly listed company, you know, how do you manage investor expectations while the SEC is still a year later still they do not have their act together? So it's, you know, do you lead or do you follow? You know, it's very interesting. But I think, again, just to sum it up, what is your sphere of influence, and how can you make a contribution?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. In my view, actually, my background is science and engineering. So whenever I look at some phenomena or something, actually, I'm a quantify or visualize everything. For me, actually, they are different scope. For example, I think the sustainability is more inclusive than SDG and ESG. And then so SDG is more inclusive than ESG, and then ESG is more fine detail. And then the only difference is that their coverage and then actually the purpose of what they want to do. And then also that is depending on that what the company or the institution or the government want to measure your sustainability or the ESG as SDG in what their way. For example, I'm going to share for example, that my view as I'm going to share my screen because I could not show you more detail about it, but this is one thing that I could not show you. So for example, that I compared for example, in the measurement aspects. So how you were performing, whether it's SDG, sustainability, or ESG. For example, that I look at the scope of the SDG here, and then also Mazi talk about SASB is a well-known standard of the measurement of your ESG performance. And then also GRI or the WF, many standards that you can mapping it. Actually, they are related in some way. So actually, this showed in the default level, what they wanted to measure the performance for what? For the whether they are doing good for the impact to the people, society, environment. So at the granular level, there is some fine detail difference in what they measure and how they measure. But in the fundamental level, they are all related. So this is my view that in a depth level, actually they are looking at the same, right? But in a different purpose and different application and different response from the company or institution. So this is one view. And I also find that this is I'm supporting Mazi's view that because, for example, that this is I'm also an AI expert, and I measure this one using the AI tool to how you will perform. This is SDG, so I can measure all different 17 topics. You measure whether your company, for example, the Apple or whatever in the US company can doing in their the SDG performance. And then I can got a very good result for this, but I've never seen the U.S. company actually reporting this kind of their performance in their sustainability reporting based on SDG. But I've seen many times in the European and some of the Asian country adopting this SDG. So it's a different depending on whether you're located and then whether your community are interested in to measure. So this is the one you have in mind that. So sustainability is more inclusive in my view, and then SDG is a somewhat broader like a proposed, but they are looking at the same to measure your performance, and then SDG ESG is more specific. And then mostly my view is that ESG is for mostly for the investors. For example, that in the US, they want whether they measure whether the investees' performance based on their investment, and then they want some way to measure in the standard way, and then they develop the ESG. So everybody know that the sustainability because it's an old history. But ESG is more like a recent one, and then also SDG also the recent one. So still is a mixed, but to me they're looking at the same thing. Okay, stop
We
sharing.
have a few questions in the chat. If Nasser, if you want to go through them and read them for other speakers.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I'm going to share my presentation, so you will look at it detail later. Okay, so Laura, we need to hurry because we prepared a lot of discussion.
Well, we are well. It's still 6 o'clock. We have some time, not so much, but some time.
Yeah, and also have a several question, another question from the
yeah,
participant today.
exactly.
So, because this is a so big topic, right? Because there are
Yeah,
many
it is
very
for
interesting.
sure.
Yeah. So
Can we ask?
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Let's move to the because the second question actually the SDGs and the SDG, how they are related. I think that I already give you some answer. So I want to, like, for example, this may be here may be some relevance for the topic, because all we talk about SDG, ESG, and sustainability is for mostly for the big company, right? But here is the question is that what are the best measure of the small to medium company? Because Juliana mentioned that she worked for the like a small to medium company, right? So she may be the right person to. So how actually the SDGs and ESG measure are fine for the large organization, but not a relevance for the small to medium ones? Maybe not. Maybe the question may be what is the best way to apply this SDG and ESG measurement to the small to medium company with more relevance? But anyway, Juliana, do you have any the answer for this question?
Yeah, it goes back to what I've said. I don't see them as the same. I don't see them as one or the other. I've in the work that I've done with different startup organizations, I have used the SDGs and the alignment to the SDGs to help us inform or redefine our purpose. I'll give you an example with the company that I'm working on right now, InsureTek. The company, by a byproduct of what they do, has a huge impact on water conservation. And through water conservation and mitigation of water waste, there's a health impact and there's an energy impact as well. So we're looking to align ourselves, this is all a work in process, to the SDGs that cover water conservation, positive health outcomes, and energy conservation. Then we're building an ESG framework to serve as our rail track, if you will, to make sure that we don't deviate from that purpose. We're laying out and we're not trying to be everything to everyone. We are a technology company that serves the built environment. So when we choose that framework, that is, whether it's the E, I am not going to say that we're going to save 500 megawatts of energy. We don't have an office, so I can't claim that. But how much we fly, the frequency which we fly, that's something that I can navigate, but that's not what's important about what we're doing. One thing that we are doing is we're aggregating different technologies. We're working with different companies in the IoT space. So one thing that I can control, that we can control, is that supply chain, which falls under the S. And we're also making sure that the governance that we implement, that our policies and our procedures and our processes are not only, yes, somebody mentioned in the chat that this is something that companies use for their benefit. Absolutely, I want to use it for a benefit, but I also have to think then on the way out is how are my policies and my processes and everything that we do affecting the outside world. So it's a two-way street, and this is the talk about double materiality. So for an SME, for a startup, I think you can absolutely make use of both. And you should make use of both. And again, it depends on how you define SDG and how you define ESG. From my perspective, it has served us right to use the SDG as helping guide that Northern Star, that purpose, and then ESG frameworks to help us guide how we govern ourselves and how we conduct ourselves both internally and vis-a-vis the external world.
Which is very interesting. Sorry if I jump in, I'm not among the speakers, but as a startup, I feel myself a little bit involved in what you are saying. And I find nice the idea that finally I personally look at SDGs, ESGs as kind of parameters. But what you are saying is that they are our parameters and the representation of our level of ethicality that serve basically much more to make sure that we reach our goals, that rather than or showcasing to others, which is exactly the opposite of what I see about ESG and SDGs. Sorry, guys, but you are all about SDGs, and I say exactly the opposite. I say that they look like very vanity stuff, while what you are saying is that is a way for measuring one's goals from an ethical perspective, which is a view that I love. So thank you, Juliana, for.
We just have to be hopeful and have to be positive, right? And we can all share, and if we have until 2030 to accomplish, a good portion of those goals, we have to share in that hope, and we have to find a common denominator. I don't know what other common denominator there is out there.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's interesting. So sorry, I didn't want to jump in, but there are some other questions that need to be answered. I guess you saw them, Alex, like, for example, somebody asking, let me go back again. If an asset management company invests and manages assets for a mining company that mines materials to manufacture EV batteries, how should the asset management company define their ESG framework?
I think that that's a more different level, very specific. So I think that here the before the question actually I found the more relevance for today's topic. So I want to talk about this first. I think that this is also we select as a discussion topic. So his comment is very interesting. ESG goals are there to be benefit company themselves and do better return for the social good. And then there are very seldom aligned with SDG, which are for the social goods across the globe, right? So I think that this is something that we prepare like actually what we measure, right? So we measure input, outcome, and impact, right? So I think that for this view that I think that the proposal is the same, but in reality was a difference. So I think that we need to be clarified that what is a proposal of ESG goal and SDGs, and then in reality that what is the best way to perform the goals, right? Do you have any answer for this question, Joe?
Well, I don't. I think we're well into this. We're an hour into this conversation, and I think my views on the U.S. and impact investing in the U.S. And for example, people like Gary Gensler, who is just only now setting up a task force to review activities by companies. I find that late, and I find that disingenuous, and so I'm just it's a uniquely American phenomena that I just simply don't understand, and I find it challenging. And so I think that the reason I always return to the SDGs is because they are clearly defined and they are attainable. They are very lofty goals, but there is a time frame, there is a commitment. To form the formation of those 17 SDGs took a couple of years, and hundreds of people were involved in crafting that vision. Britain and Japan were probably the only two nations who complained. Now, when it comes to ESG, we do not have a common definition of either of those letters, any of those letters, ESG. And the one that I always drill down on, and I have today, is S. Again, it's a uniquely American phenomenon, and it's something that is not being addressed. Whereas, I'll just conclude with this, with the SDGs, violence against women and death at childbirth is at the top of the, is at the top of the ticket, and they're making great strides there. And yet in the US, the battle for women just continues on and on and on. And we see that at every level. We see that in corporations, and we see that in politics.
Sure. Is there any other view for this question?
So I have a specific example. I'm working on a case study with a Danish pension fund called Akademikerpension. So it's a pension fund for professors in Denmark and psychologists. And they have very active membership that wants to see that their money doesn't go into companies that don't meet with their ethics or their values. And so the investment team is constantly being challenged by members, the people who put the money into the pension fund, about things that they're investing in. One of the things that comes up in annual shareholder meetings is those upstream investments that they make into mining companies and extractive companies. And so there was a really great question here about, what about a company that's extracting minerals for electric vehicle? How do you manage that? So SASB gives very specific guidelines for every type of company, including companies in the extractive industries, about how to disclose their E, S, and G activities. Then investors like Akademikerpension take a look at the reports, the annual reports that are informed by standards like SASB, and they take a look to see whether they're confident that Rio Tinto, for example, is doing everything it can to mitigate its impact on the environment while it's doing those extractive things. And there's always going to be ambiguity about what they're actually doing on the ground. So the investors go and have meetings with the companies and with the company board and the company CEO and the head of sustainability, and they sit down and talk about specific issues that concern them that might transcend what's being disclosed in the annual reports. And that's the sort of messy way that sustainability is being created these days. It's by these engagements from asset managers directly with upstream, extractive companies. And eventually, what happens is that those companies start to feel pressure, because what might happen is an investor will put a motion forward, as happened with Exxon, which is another company involved in extractive industries, to change the board members to then put more pressure on the management to change its environmental practices. And so the investors are starting to take more of an active role. And the reason they're doing it is because their members are asking them to, but also because there's an assumption that if a company doesn't meet with the expectations of members, then eventually they're not meeting with the expectations of society. Eventually they're not going to be a profitable company. So it's becoming very interrelated between societal expectations, risk management, and long-term viability of a company, and then the nitty-gritty interaction between investors and the companies that run, the people who run companies. And that's how the sort of sustainability sausage is being made in practice.
Thank you, Mazi. Laura.
We have 10 minutes. So
yeah,
just
10 minutes.
Just the time for closing, wrapping up everything. If you want to ask it to our speakers, they are let's say, last thought on the
I think
topic?
that because there are many specific questions from audience. Actually, I just copy everything here. So because we maybe discuss later how we can answer this question, because it's very difficult to have this kind of like a distinguished panel and speakers like today. So why don't you just pick one specific question, Laura?
So one for all. There is a relatively new approach called the balanced scorecards for the ecosystem that proposes to develop a scorecard at the meso, basin, or territory to measure sustainability. Are you familiar with what do you think about it?
I think that's question from Manuel, isn't it?
No, Armando. Armando.
Oh, then Manuel is my collaborator. Yeah.
Alex, we need to connect, but if Laura will share our contact information, because we're working on the same project. Please continue, and apologies for interrupting.
Actually, the Manuel and me are working on the how like for example how you can measure in a company level, and then how you can well balance between sustainability and profitability. Actually, we are going to have another webinar, a very specification. I'm not sure whether we have that answer for that specification, because balance scorecard is very specific for maybe Juliana. Yeah, she is expert in also in
Juliana, it seems that you are a great source.
His background is management strategy. So.
The truth is, I am not familiar with it, but I am a little bit wary because there's so many scorecards and so many frameworks and so many things that at some point, particularly if you're coming from the startup world, you got to draw the line somewhere. You can't possibly be everything to everyone. So I'm at a point in my work where, I'm trying to stick to a specific number. Otherwise, I can go crazy and never really finish aligning and strategizing and incorporating and embedding. So I'll read on it. I think it's interesting. Caroline, mentioned something about water usage, which is up my alley. So I will definitely look into it, but I don't really have anything specific.
Can I summarize saying that finally it's all about us? So the measurement is all about us. So either it is something that we have in, or it's not a number or a value provided by, I don't know which standard, that will change how we run our companies. Is that correct or wrong? Well, because you are all specialists in sustainability and SDGs, ESGs. I want to understand if we have to rely on standards or if we have to find our standards for ourselves.
Let me jump in, because I know that we're about to close, but just the academic part of me, I just, because I know we're recording this session, so I just want to go on record with these statistics, which I think are very telling. So this was a post yesterday by a colleague on LinkedIn. 421 out of 593 ESG equity funds have portfolios misaligned with the Paris climate targets. 72 out of 130 climate funds are also not in line with the Paris Accord. So I think that there's much work to be done.
Yes, but there is much work to do for defining the standards or for aligning us to the standards, because it depends from which perspective. I want to be a little bit controversial and make this conversation a little bit more fun than just repeating that we should be ethical.
I believe that standards like SASB are truly, they're extremely well thought out. So it's not the standards. I think the standards that we have in place are solid. I think it's the performance of the bad actors. Yeah.
Well,
Okay, so Laura, so
as a founder of a startup, obviously,
we
I
only
don't
have
agree.
left 5 minutes.
Yeah, just 5 minutes. It's
Yeah.
not enough for discussing further. Well,
Yeah.
do you want to wrap up, Alex, and then I close?
Yes. I think that we only have left 5 minutes, so I want to hear from all speakers about their general view or the conclusion or the final thought about your view about like ESG and SDG and sustainability measurement, and then if you see anything that whether better way to measure or whatever your final thoughts, you can talk about. Joseph, you can go first.
No, as I said, I think that the TCFD and SASB are the standards that we need, and they are in place, and they have been well thought out. They've been around for a while. Of course, Bloomberg heads up TCFD, and that's a very important agency. So I do not think that it's the standards that we need to question when we talk about publicly listed reporting, either in annual reports or as impact investors speak to their portfolio advisors. I'm just concerned about the looseness of ESG and the ease with which corporations are able to take advantage of that slippery slope. Yeah.
Thank you, Juliana.
From my corner of the world, in the startup world, I would say it's a fantastic opportunity that we have in the startup community to start laying out the foundation for our companies. It's a lot harder to change the course of a big tanker versus the course of a small canoe. And from where I'm coming from, I have the opportunity to build the strategy of my company or help shape the strategy of my company based on whichever standard I think, or my team and I think, matches best with what we're trying to do. So I would say it's never too early to start. Don't be intimidated. View this, we only have one planet. View this as an excellent opportunity to collaborate, start building your networks in the space early on. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I don't think there's such a thing as an expert in ESG, as an expert in SDGs. It's relatively new and we're learning as we go. And the more I know, the more I realize that I don't know. So don't take the fear away from what you're doing on your day-to-day and just jump in. That would be and I'm happy to talk about my experience from a startup perspective with anyone who wants to reach out to me.
Thanks, Juliana. Mazi?
I guess it was a wonderful. Thank you very much again, Laura and Alex and Juliana and Joe for this wonderful, and everybody in the audience for this wonderful discussion. So many incredible comments in the chat, so much wisdom in this group. I guess I would say that the governments are moving in the right direction with regulations. Companies are moving in the right direction with their disclosures, and consumers are moving in the right direction in terms of ethical buying. What's holding everybody up, and I think the asymptote the system is going to reach, what will limit further progress, is the lack of transparency so that people can make good decisions. That's all. So we need more information to make better decisions, and that requires transparency. And back to Laura's, core business as a founder of a blockchain company, that transparency can't really come from self-reporting. It has to come from something that's more immutable and more transparent, and that's end to end, from the moment some extractive service begins or any kind of economic activity begins, all the way through the entire life cycle. So, I look forward to the first company that comes out and presents its entire supply chain fully transparent in a blockchain format. So when I go on my phone to buy the product of that company, I can push the button and in real time see everything that's happening in the company and how it stacks up in terms of considerations that I might have in terms of its ethics. And that will be the next sort of jump in the sustainability pathway that hopefully we're all on. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for everyone. And then I finished my law. So Laura, why don't you close up?
Well, Mazi perfectly closed up I think transparency is a key for building a trust, and whatever we say is all around building a trust and relying on trust in what we buy, on whom we collaborate with, etc. So the first ethical decision that we should take is about being transparent, and that's what we as TiiQu are working on. That's correctly not on product but on people, and we invite you all to be part of the TiiQu ecosystem. I'm happy to chat again separately about TiiQu. For the moment, I just invite you all to follow TiiQu Talks and be part of the community that enhance skills that matter, like Mazi, Juliana, Joseph, and of course Alex, who are here together with us today.